Hello everybody, it's Mr. G, and once again we're back with Misconceptions in History. And today, a continuation where last couple weeks I talked about kind of like the brief history of the battleship. Today I'm going to start a series where we're going to look at some of the largest battleships ever created, a brief bit about their history and their legacy. And I want to start us off with probably one of the most famous of what we would consider maybe a heavy battleship, and that's going to be the Bismarck Class. So in order to better understand how we got to the Bismarck, I think we need to go back in time to the German high seas fleet and how we went from their dreadnoughts to their largest battleship they ever built in the Kriegsmarine. So obviously we need to start off at World War I. And this really was the end of the German high seas fleet. At the end of World War I, the British actually took possession of the German high seas fleet. So as part of the end of the war, the Germans actually moved the remainder of their navy to Scapa Flow, which is in Scotland, and the ships were being decommissioned there while they decided what they were going to do with them. And basically, the remaining crews scuttled the entire fleet and sank them right there in Scapa Flow, thus rendering any points by the Treaty of Versailles that would dictate where their ships were going to go moot, and prevented anybody from able to basically take over this massive navy. So when the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 negotiations begin, Germany has nothing to give up. They have no standing navy at this time. So the only thing they're told to do is basically follow the new rules. And they do so for roughly the next decade or so. Now, by the time we get into the 1930s, we start seeing military buildups again around the world. Germany is no stranger to this, and they're actually going to start pushing the boundaries of many of these agreements, so much so that the British tried to get them to agree to the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, which basically said that German Navy was only going to be 35% of the size of the British one. And the Germans start trying to find some clever ways and creative means of kind of skirting around this. And the first of this is going to be the Deutschland class cruiser, which is also nicknamed a pocket battleship. And this is because they actually exceeded their allowed weight tonnage as created by the treaties. And their guns were actually 11 inches, which were much larger than any other caliber of a cruiser, which is why they're nicknamed a pocket battleship. Now, this is immediately followed by the Scharnhorst class, which is really Germany's first purpose-built battleship since the First World War. And these were actually a battleship in terms of size and armament, but in terms of their actual arms, they were again armed with the same 11-inch guns seen on the Deutschland class, so they were actually very underarmed compared to other ships. Now, obviously, their immediate replacement is going to completely eliminate this problem. Interestingly enough, the Richelieu class battleship, which is a French battleship, is actually the real reason the Bismarck ends up being created. And that's because the French Navy posed a serious threat to the Germans and the German Navy. So they needed a ship that could go toe-to-toe with this large French battleship, and that's where we get the Bismarck class from. Now, noticing that the Scharnhorst class couldn't handle the Richelieu class, the Bismarck class battleship is created by the Germans for their navy. Now, the Bismarck class battleships could stand toe-to-toe with the Richelieu class, as they had 15-inch guns to match the Richelieu and had a speed of 30 knots, which is about 35 miles per hour. And the overall design of the Bismarck class was actually designed not necessarily be a long-range attack battleship, but more of a ship designed to stay close to Germany and protect its borders and its interests. Tragically, as famous as the Bismarck itself was, its entire service career was 8 months long. Bismarck actually completed one operation, and that was Operation Rheinbogen, in which it actually raided North Atlantic convoys, which is against its initial design. However, in the process of doing so, it actually destroyed the battle cruiser HMS Hood and damaged a brand new battleship, the Prince of Wales. And in response, a few days later, the British launched a massive campaign against the Bismarck, which included a torpedo strike from the HMS Ark Royal. Now, the Ark Royal actually manages to strike the Bismarck, and it actually jams its rudder in a turning position, which means it cannot escape back to Germany, and makes it vulnerable to multiple attacks that are going to happen over the next couple of days. Now, through a combined effort with the battleships King George V and the Rodney, in addition to more torpedo attacks, and eventually scuttling of the Bismarck is taken down and sunk. And thus we have the end of the 8-month career of the Bismarck. And the Bismarck was actually rediscovered in 1989 by Robert Ballard, the same man who found the Titanic, and is sitting at a depth of about 16,000 feet under the ocean. And now let's talk about the sister ship to the Bismarck, the Tirpitz, who had a much longer lifespan than the Bismarck, but not as active as a career. The Tirpitz actually spent the first couple of years of its service as kind of an aerial denial vessel. It was basically placed in Norwegian waters to prevent the British from trying to send convoys to the Soviet Union. Basically just a denial of area kind of tactic where the threat of the ship being there should be enough to prevent anyone from trying to challenge them. Now, that doesn't mean the Tirpitz had a relatively easy career. And in fact, from 1942 to 1944, both the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force put a lot of effort trying to sink it, but never succeeded. Now, this would all change in November of 1944 when Operation Catechism is launched. And this was about 30 Lancaster bombers that are going to be launched against the Tirpitz, and they're going to drop what's known as tall boy bombs. And a tall boy bomb is a 12,000-pound bomb. And these are called earthquake bombs. And these tall boy bombs were actually designed to attack hardened structures. They would penetrate deep into the earth and explode, and the concussive wave would travel through the earth, which travels much easier than through the air and could cause more damage. And 2 of these hit the Tirpitz, and they did so much damage they actually capsized the ship. And the Tirpitz would actually remain there for the remainder of the war, and they began scrapping it in 1948 and finished by 1957. Now, I don't want you to think the legacy of the Bismarck actually ends there, because had the war continued, we would have seen the H-class battleship appear, and this was the immediate replacement for the Bismarck. Now, the H-class was a series of battleships, starting with the H-39, which would basically have been an enlarged Bismarck class that would have carried 16-inch guns instead of 15s. And each subsequent series would have just been able to handle larger guns and better armament. There were plans for 16.5-inch guns all the way up to 20-inch guns as the final design of the H-class. And the H-class was actually closer to reality than most people realize, as the first 2 H-39s, which remember these are the immediate replacements for the Bismarcks that had 16-inch guns, actually had their hulls laid down in 1939, but by 1941 they were scrapped and their steel was used for other purposes. So that's it for today, and I do thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll continue to watch as we look through some of the final major battleship classes ever built. We do have the Yamato class in the future, the Vanguard class, and of course the absolutely wonderful Iowa class battleships. So that's it for today. I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.